I was on the London Underground heading into Zone 1, that damp metal smell in the carriage and everyone doing the British thing of pretending no one else exists. Across from me, a sunburned Midwestern dad in a brand new Freedom t-shirt was clutching a fistful of dollars and crumpled pound notes, squinting at the Oyster logo like it personally offended him. He cleared his throat and announced, "For everyone and no one, so where do I swipe my dollars so the train knows I'm American?" The woman next to him quietly showed him the contactless symbol and explained the whole Oyster system. I just thought if the train really knew he was American, it would probably start charging extra for emotional labor. In Rome, near the entrance to St. Peter's, it was already hot enough that the stone smelled like warm dust. A tour group had bunched up at security, and at the front was a stocky Texas business guy in golf shorts and a polo with his company logo, loudly checking his Apple Watch like the Pope was late for a quarterly review. The guard told his wife she needed to cover her shoulders. He raised his voice and said, "You guys really need to modernize this dress code if you want America to take you seriously." The guard just handed them a paper shawl and moved the line along. Somewhere in heaven, a bored saint probably added dress code consultant to the list of strange new martyrdoms. In Munich, late afternoon, the beer garden smelled like grilled sausage and spilled lager, and the chestnut trees were throwing patchy shade over long wooden tables. I was halfway through a liter when this retired Florida golfer in a pastel polo and white visor sat down, patting his belly like he was staking a claim. The waitress brought him a Moss, and he stared at it the way Americans stare at metric units. Then he came out with, "Back home, we'd get free refills and AC. You guys should really upgrade this system before tourists complain." She smiled, said he could upgrade by ordering another liter, and walked off. I figured Bavaria has survived empires. It can probably survive one guy missing air conditioning. On a side street in Paris, I was wedged into a tiny cafe where the smell of burnt espresso and buttered croissant somehow worked. Outside, scooters whined past, and everyone pretended not to smoke. At the counter, a stocky, middle-aged American in a college football hoodie and immaculate white sneakers was poking at the chalkboard menu like it was a legal document. The barista set down a tiny espresso. He frowned and said, "You should warn people this is the kid's size and offer a real American coffee." The barista just pointed at the espresso and said, "C'est le vrai." I sipped mine and thought the only grande in the room was his sense of entitlement. Out by the Blue Lagoon in Iceland, steam was rolling up into this weird blue-gray sky, and everything smelled faintly like hot rocks and sulfur. A group of us were shuffling along the slippery edge while the staff repeated for the 10th time not to run. This stocky guy in a windbreaker with an American flag patch, socks pulled up, GoPro strapped to his chest, looked out at the black lava field like it had personally failed an inspection. Then he said, "You folks really need more guardrails. In the States, someone would sue you into the Stone Age." The Icelandic attendant just nodded and said they'd managed to keep rocks around longer than most lawsuits. I figured if the Vikings didn't kid-proof the lava, the tourists could probably handle it for one afternoon. In Amsterdam, it was one of those gray days where the canals looked like they'd been poured out of a kettle. I was standing on a narrow bridge, listening to bike bells and trying not to die, when a cruise ship American dad in a neon Europe 2025 windbreaker blocked half the path. He unfolded a paper map like it was 1983, squinted, and started counting countries on his fingers. Then he goes, "So is Holland like your biggest state, or do you guys just pretend these countries are separate?" A Dutch biker slowed just enough to explain the whole sovereign nations, European Union, not the same thing deal. At my age, you learn. If someone calls your country a state, the only warning they need is that gravity still works. On a Swiss mountain train heading toward Interlaken, the air was that clean, cold kind that makes you aware of every bad decision you've ever made with your lungs. Across from the window, an older American tech bro in a Patagonia vest and noise-canceling headphones kept checking his phone like Wi-Fi was a human right. The conductor came by to clip tickets, and the guy looked out at the villages and said, "You people really need to update your history. All this neutral stuff is bad branding. You'd do better selling yourselves like a startup." The conductor smiled politely and moved on without a word. The nice thing about steep valleys is that stupid opinions echo for a second and then disappear into the rock. In Barcelona early evening, the air smelled like fried fish, sunscreen, and cheap perfume, all fighting for dominance along the beach promenade. I was sitting on a low wall, watching the slow shift from families to drunk groups, when a loud American fun uncle, type in a tank top that said, "Party Coach," started lecturing his friends. A waiter explained that dinner service started later, kitchen wasn't really open yet. The guy clapped his hands and said, "You should warn people normal countries eat at 6. This whole dinner at 9 thing is terrible for business." The waiter nodded, promised Spain would look into fixing several centuries of habit, and walked off. Somewhere between tapas and midnight, the only thing that changed was how loudly his friends started ignoring him. Up on the Acropolis in Athens, the sun was doing that merciless Greek thing where even the marble looks tired. A breeze carried dust, and the faint smell of cheap sunscreen, while everyone tried not to trip on stones older than most ideas. Next to one of the roped-off sections, a stout American in a polo with his company's real estate logo was staring at the broken columns. He shook his head and said, "Someone should warn you, this place looks half-finished. In the States, we'd tear it down and rebuild a proper version for tourists." The guide calmly explained it was about 2,500 years old, and kind of important. I mean, look, if your renovation timeline starts at since before Christ, you're not really in the same league as a strip mall developer. On a fjord cruise in Norway, the water was so still it looked fake, like someone had copy-pasted it from a wallpaper. Cold air bit at any exposed skin, but the sun was still up even though it felt late, that weird northern thing where time gives up. A middle-aged American corporate guy in a quarter zip and boat shoes kept checking his watch, baffled by the daylight. Then he announced to his wife and half the deck, "They should warn people the sun is broken up here. In America, we'd regulate this for people's sleep cycles." The Norwegian guide just mentioned something about the Arctic Circle and kept pouring coffee. I figured if Scandinavia can handle months of darkness, they can handle one man losing an argument with the sky. In a small pub in Dublin, the air was a mix of spilled Guinness, wood polish, and whatever history smells like when it's soaked into furniture. I was at the bar, watching a quiet group of locals talk low over their pints, when an American in a faded "Kiss Me, I'm Irish" shirt leaned in, already a pint ahead. He looked at his glass, then at the bartender and said, "You should warn people this isn't like in the movies. Back home, the Irish bars play loud music and have fights. This is false advertising." The bartender calmly told him he was welcome to quietly enjoy the very real Irish bar in front of him. The only punch thrown that night was the one word "no" when he tried to order green beer. At the Vienna State Opera, the foyer smelled like perfume and old carpet, and everything seemed to have more gold on it than necessary. A tour group milled around in rented jackets, trying to act like they belonged there. Among them was an American CEO type in a sharp blazer, Bluetooth still in his ear, looking up at the chandeliers like they were potential assets. The guide explained the season schedule, the tradition, the dress code. He raised his hand and said, "You should really rethink this model. In the States, we'd add VIP tiers and dynamic pricing. You're leaving money on the table." The guide just nodded, said the house had managed since 1869, and moved on. Opera doesn't need a growth hacker. It needs people who can sit still for more than 3 minutes without checking their phone. On Bondi Beach in Sydney, The sand was hot enough to make you reconsider walking barefoot. And the sun felt like it had a personal vendetta. I was hiding under an umbrella watching surfers when a beefy American gym bro in star-spangled board shorts marched up to a lifeguard, sunglasses perched aggressively on his forehead. He looked around, clearly disappointed not to see wildlife, and said, "You guys should warn people. There aren't any kangaroos on the beach. That's false advertising, and this sun is unsafe by American standards." The lifeguard pointed at the UV index sign and the sunscreen station like he'd done it 1,000 times. If the ozone layer doesn't scare you into reading the sign, no amount of American standards is going to finish the job. Somewhere in the Australian outback, at one of those lonely roadhouses where the air tastes like dust and gasoline, a few of us were stretching our legs beside sun-bleached picnic tables. A rental SUV pulled in, and out stepped a prepper-looking American uncle in cargo shorts and tactical sunglasses, unfolding a map like it owed him money. The attendant told him the next town was a few hundred kilometers away. He snorted and said, "You should warn tourists. Your country's spaced wrong. In America, this would all be suburbs by now." The attendant just shrugged and went back inside. Out there, the only thing that cares about your suburban feelings is the fuel gauge. In Lisbon, late afternoon light was bouncing off the yellow trams and tiled facades, and the whole city smelled like coffee and pastry. I was squeezed into tram 28 with a bunch of tourists, hanging on to a metal pole that had clearly seen some things. Next to me, a retired American salesman in a golf cap was loudly working through the language situation, switching between bad Spanish and louder English. The driver called out something in Portuguese about the next stop. The guy shook his head and said, "You folks should warn visitors you don't use standard Spanish or standard American English. It's confusing for global customers." A local just smiled and offered him a pastel de nata in perfect English without further comment. If your biggest complaint in Lisbon is too many languages, the tram isn't the thing that took a wrong turn.